Welcome, Shivaprakash. He has been my friend for several years, and he's one of the most leading writers in Kannada. He's a playwright. He's a poet. He has already been introduced. He's a major poet, a major playwright, a major critic. He was professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he was also the editor of Indian literature at the Sahitya Akademi in Delhi. I would like to begin our conversation by just asking him to tell us something about the way you came to writing. I mean, both poetry and plays. Something about your growing up. Something about the people who you consider your teachers, and how you came into writing. And who were you? Did you have any model?
I had no model. At the age of 7, I saw a peacock for the first time in the most crowded part of city, Bangalore. And then I felt like writing a poem. Why I wrote it, I don't remember. I don't even have the poem with me. That was my first poem. And then I continued writing poetry when I was attending my English honors classes. We had a very good teacher who spoke in perfect British accent. So I couldn't follow what she said. So, on the pretext of taking notes, I started scribbling poetry. And I never took it seriously until my poetry guru, Gopal Krishna Adiga, took me very seriously and published my poem Milarepa in the journal that he was editing. Because Adiga started taking my poetry seriously, I too started taking it somewhat seriously and went on writing poetry for many years. And then I felt poetry had become somewhat elitist in our culture. So that's what took me to theatre. And because a lot of critics are writing very bad criticism, remember what Miroslav Holub said, a poet should be at least one bit better than the critic. I started writing criticism also.
I think your Milarepa came out when you were only 23.
21.
And how was it received, and what was the kind of response that the Kannada readers gave to this?
A lot of people felt that I'm outdated. Some people said I'm a religious poet, and some people said it's not modern. Because in those days, to qualify as a modern poet in Kannada, it was necessary that there should be a snake in the poem. And there were so many snakes. I was sick of these snakes, so I wanted to write poems without snakes. So they didn't consider, and a lot. One leading newspaper, Prajavani, which was what created modern movement in Kannada, the editor consistently rejected my poetry until one critic called Kiram Nagaraj and then Gopal Krishna Adiga took me seriously. The literary public didn't take me seriously at all.
Of course, at least some critics have called you a kind of post-Bandaya Kannada poet. How do you look at that, and how do you look at the Bandaya, both the modern poetry movement in Kannada, which was essentially pioneered by Gopala Krishna Adiga, and the Bandaya poetry?
Of course, I started writing during the heyday of modernism, where Anant Murthy, Lankesh, Girish Karnad, and all these greats, And of course, Adiga was still there.
Yeah.
But Adiga, he created Kannada modernism, but he moved on. And there was another great poet who is not mentioned outside Karnataka, but is hardly been translated. Very good poet, as good as Adiga was, K.S. Nasimswamy. He also started as a romantic, but became a very important modern poet.
Is that loud enough?
Okay, very important modern poet. And these were my kind of gurus. And I learned a few things from modernism, how to use the language carefully, how to handle the image, the symbol and so on. Some technical things I learned from modernists. And then from Dalit and women's poetry, when it came into Kannada, it brought in new sensibility and a new way of looking at things. I learnt a few things from that. I have learned from everybody, but I have moved on. And if you ask me who are my ancestors are Allama Prabhu, Basavanna, Akamadevi, and Shishnal Sharif, and so on. They are my ancestors. And I trace my poetry directly back to those great masters of medieval literature.
Yeah, that brings us to, I think, at least two questions. One is something about Mahachaitra, a play you wrote based on the life of Basavanna, the great Shaivite poet. And I understand it also caused some controversy. We would like to hear about that and how did it happen, and what exactly caused the kind of controversy that Mahachaitra did. And secondly, of course, your own relationship with the Shaivite movement in general and Shaivite poetry in particular.
This Mahachaitra is a long story. That was my first play. There had already been a play on this theme by Lankesh in Kannada, and later Girish Karnad wrote his play called Tadedanda, and recently Kambar also wrote a play called Shivratri on the same theme. But my play created controversy because there were a few things that people say against Basavanna in the play for Basavanna's antagonists. And
But it is said by the characters and not by you. No?
Yes, characters. But and also there was an ambivalence in the depiction of Basavanna's passing away. We have no historical records. So in my play, it happens in a play within the play, and it suggests it could be suicide, it could have been a murder, it could have been something else, as people had visions of him merging in light. All these things is possible. But one woman, Jagadguru, she opposed to this. She said, how can Basavanna die a natural death? He aroused this Kundalini, and the Kundalini went into Sastra and so on. But this woman herself died the natural death, and her guru also died the natural death. I said, what happened to people? Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, great yogis, all of them die, the body has to die. So they said, no, it's an insult to the community. So this is how it started, and this controversy went on for 2 years. And I don't want to go into all the details. And there's a book called The Book and Trial by Girija Kumar, who was a former librarian in JNU. And he has written an entire chapter on the controversy of this book. It divided the caste of Karnataka into pro and against the book. It was debated in the assembly, in the council, and I lived under threat for nearly 2 years. And I was nicknamed Salman Rushdie of Karnataka, which I hated because I am not a Salman Rushdie fan at all. So then it waned. The book was, they tried to ban it. They went to court, but court didn't upheld the book. But now people are afraid of prescribing it as textbook, and nobody has the guts to produce it in Kannada. Of course, the play was produced in other language, Malayalam. Sam Kutty did it in Cochin, and several other people have done it. In Karnataka, the impact of this controversy is that people talk about it, but nobody does the play. So there's little afraid. It's become a kind of stigmatized book.
Yeah, you also have a play on Sultan Tippu, and Tippu Sultan is now a very, very controversial figure in India, and recently there have been a lot of discussion around him and the role he played. And so how do you look at Tippu Sultan in history as well as in the various representations?
A historical play is not history, number one. And many people, including many playwrights, think that historical drama is history. It's not. So he's a character in the play. I had to make him a Dhirodata Nayaka. I know about the controversial part of Tippu's history. I am told in Kerala, a lot of people name their dogs Tippu, because Tippu is a hated character in Kerala, because he resorted to forced civil conversions in Kodagu and in Kerala, because I am told Nayars of Kerala and Kodavas were supporting the British, whatever the reason. He's a controversial figure. There are good and bad things about any king in the past. But in the play as a character, I depicted Tippu as a kind of a Sufi character. There was a very strong Sufi element in his character. In fact, he was named after a Sufi saint, Mastan Tippu Wali, who blessed his mother, and then Tippu was born, so on and so forth. So, and Tippu, for me, the most important thing was he was the only consistent fighter against British colonialism. Whereas his father Hyder Ali was not, and the Marathas were not, and the Nizam was not. They would change sides according to the convenience, but he took an ideological position against colonialism. He was the first great anti-colonial fighter. Unlike any king or ruler in the past, He has his pluses and minuses, but that's not what my play is about.
Yeah, you also have a play on Shakespeare, Shakespeare's Sopranauke.
Yes.
What are you trying to say in that play,
See,
and
I
how do you
was,
look at Shakespeare? I mean, in the play.
My theatre guru B.V. Karan once wanted me to translate King Lear for him.
Yeah.
There was a translation of King Lear by the great Jnanpith award-winning writer Masti Venkatesh Iyengar. I told Karan, why didn't you do it? He said, you can't, it's not stageable. The language is not stageable. You do it. So I worked on it, and Karan directed this play. It was a great success. And then I started wondering, why should I translate Shakespeare? Yeah? Because in Kannada we have very good adaptations of Shakespeare. It's better to adapt Shakespeare. Then I did an adaptation of the Macbeth is called Maranayaka Drishtanta. I did another Macbeth Atta. In the meantime, I thought the dramatic language has a lot to learn from Shakespeare. So I wanted to create myself an opportunity to translate the best of Shakespeare's passages. So I decided to write a play on Shakespeare's life, which is a kind of adaptation of the British play. I forget the name of the modern British play. It's called Bingo in English. It's a very short play. I expanded it to a full-length play, and this play was a result of reading all works of Shakespeare and the whole lot of history of British colonialism and so on and so forth.
Yeah, in your, if I can call it your philosophy, I can see 3 or 4 major strands. There is, of course, Shaivism, which has very deeply impacted you, right from the play that you wrote around Basava's life. And then there is perhaps an element of Sufism, which also comes in Sultan Tippu. And I understand you have also been impacted by Buddhism, especially Mahayana and Zen Buddhism. So there is something deeply spiritual about you. I know you also have some spiritual gurus. But you are also politically, at least many of us consider you a left-wing person. Not that you belong to any party, but broadly left-wing. So did you find any difficulty in reconciling this left-wing politics with the kind of spiritual gurus that you found? Or is it natural that they go together?
A lot of my friends and readers had this problem. When I came out with my spiritual autobiography, which is now out in English also, Everyday Yogi, Kannada is Batis Raga, it became a bestseller. It was on the top bestseller list for 3 years. And many of my friends, mostly leftists, they thought that I had, floor crossed to the other side. But the right never took me seriously, because they never take me seriously. We have nothing to do with them. So I learnt a lot from our saintly tradition of saints and siddhas and sufis. And I imbibed that humanistic philosophy which believes in some kind of egalitarianism, which is against hierarchy. These things I learned from my tradition, and this is something that it shares. This outlook shares with progressive politics in the 20th century. But what I'm more interested in than in ideology is the experience and the expression of this tradition. I focus on that. But I've never been. I was part of some leftist parties in the past, but later I decided not to be part of any political outfit, because I think that I remember Premchand, when he was the president of the Progressive Writers Conference somewhere in Lucknow or somewhere, he said a writer should be the torch bearer of a movement, not a flag bearer. So I wanted to be the torch bearer of either religion or politics. Was Basavanna religious? I don't know. He was called irreligious by his contemporaries. Gnande, was he religious? He was condemned and hounded by Brahmins of his days. He was considered to be a kind of rebel. So, Umar Khayyam has a beautiful line, every school has a theory about me, but I am what I am.
Yeah, I understand you have just completed a new play. Would you like to share something about the new play? And
This is a play on the last days of Krishna.
Krishna.
I have been wanting to
You
write
called
a
it
play.
Uttara Bhagavata.
It's called Uttara Bhagavata. And the how Krishna, who is considered to be all powerful, was unable to prevent the whole scale destruction of his own clan. And he not only didn't stop it, he tried to expedite it. What were the moral issues that were involved in doing this? And also theatrically, I wanted to show Krishna. Why should Krishna always be shown as a young man? So after all, he lived many years after he left Dwarka. So I am showing Krishna as a very old man, and Radha is also very old in this play. And his clan has become a very corrupt community which deserve to be destroyed. And this is also related to a history of curses, and then cycles of good and evil and so on. In one sense, it's a commentary which many people, I am sure, will not be able to say on the present day scenario. But basically, I wanted to, and there is a very good play in Kannada about Krishna written by Puti Narasimhacharya, Gokula Nirgama, fantastic play, not been translated to English. In this play, Krishna leaves Vrindavan to Dwaraka. He says, now the time of celebration is over, now is the time of struggle. So he goes to, this play was written on the eve of freedom, Indian freedom, independence. Now in this play, the end of the play, Radha and Krishna buries his flute in Vrindavan before he goes to Dwaraka. In this play, Radha excavates this flute and brings it back to Krishna, and she revives Krishna, and then the whole play moves from history into a kind of eternity of the Ras Leela. And I am going to conclude the play with a few shlokas taken from in the Rasa Leela description of Sri Narayana.
Yeah, by the way, how do you, I'm sure you have read something by Sri Narayana Guru, at least in translation. So how do you look at, because Guru is for us one of the pioneers of Kerala's Renaissance, and he belongs to the great tradition of saints who renounced caste, and in the last days he even renounced religion. He said, I don't have any religion, I don't belong to any caste. So how do you look at Guru if you know him closely enough?
He is somewhat like Ramalinga Adigal in Tamil Nadu.
Mm-hmm.
As both of them were deeply influenced by the Siddha tradition, ultimately they went beyond all schools. Ramalinga Adigal even gave up all marks of Shaivism. He wrote such wonderful devotional poem. Petratai Kudandai Marandal, Kudandai Tantai Marandal, Namachivai Nan Maraveni. This kind of poem. He gave up all that. He just talked about Arut Perinjodi, Tanip Perinkarani, Arut Perinjodi, and he established what are called Jiva Karinya Sabhas. See, Narayana Guru also went beyond all these things, and he was talking about trying to touch upon a kind of cosmic, humanistic spiritual tradition. I find Narayana Guru very important. But what I was talking about, I was not talking about the Narayana Guru. There's this Narayana Pattapadi Narayaniam, which is a fantastic work of poetry according to me. And some of the passages as beautiful as Gita Govindam. I want to use some passages from that text.
I understood that, but I asked you about
yes,
Narayana Guru.
Yeah,
mainly because
and I read some
he also learned a lot from the Shaivites.
Yes, he's from the Tamil
Shaivites, particularly Tirumula.
But I think he also got into this Vedanta, and to my mind, Vedanta is a very misleading school of philosophy. Because Bendre wrote one line, Vedantaya Mukhamudraya Nodi Kanikara Huttuvudu. If I look at the wan face of a Vedantin, my heart is filled with pity.
Two more questions maybe, and then if there is time, I'll ask our audience to have an interaction. One is about your engagement with Tamil. I know you know Tamil, and what is the kind of engagement you have with the language, with the writing in Tamil, and with the whole Tamil tradition of philosophy and poetry, which in some sense Malayalis also share?
My mother was from Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
I learned Tamil scripts before I learned Kannada alphabets. And in my childhood, mother used to tell me the stories of Silapadigaram, and she used to sing the songs of Tevaram and Arunariginada's Tiruppugal and so on. I was brought up listening to Tamil Shaivite and Murugan devotional poetry and the story of Silapadigaram and so on. And then I also used to listen to the Vachanas, read out in my house. So these shaped my sensibility. Later, I delved deep into Tamil classical tradition, the Sangam tradition, and though I can't read Sangam text, I have some knowledge of Tamil. Silapadigaram is one book that has impacted me more than the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And in fact, I have written 3 plays based on Silapadigaram. And the story of Silapadigaram is shared between Tamil Nadu and Kerala because Kannagi temple is in Kerala. So I find it a fascinating, not story. Silapadigaram is a kind of a set of situations and characters which Nagugi would call it's a substratum of so many texts. He calls it orature. Orature is a system of stories and characters which constitutes many expressions, literary and theatrical and so on and so forth. For example, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata oratures, which are recreated again and again. So Silapadigaram is such a great work. And another interesting thing about it is perhaps the first great epic which has the woman as protagonist. There are only 2 of them. One is Silapadigaram, the other is the Tuluva epic called Siri. So the first time a great woman-centric narrative where heroism is not celebrated, but the feminine is celebrated.
Yeah, and maybe my last question. Of course, I have quite a few questions. Your engagement with folklore. You have a play like Madari Madaya, and you have very often spoken about Kannada folklore and the kind of impact it had on you as a child and even after growing up. So how do you look at the relevance of folklore today, and how is folklore being revived in various ways in Indian languages?
The word folklore was never used in India until one professor called Jawaharlal Nehru. He set up a folklore department in Srinagar University.
I meant a folklore. I know. In English, we don't have a word for that.
Yeah, Kannada, of course, this Janapada, this word was born. But I think these are Orientalist ways of looking. These folk traditions are not dead and gone traditions. They are very much living. For example, when this annual festival of Madari Madaya Mahadeshwara happens in that hill, thousands of people gather, and he is a living person for many people in that area. So that living gods, these saints. And I saw a direct connection between the tradition of Malay Madeshwara and Monteswami, who are the two great untouchable saints. I see them as the descendants of 12th century Vachana tradition. That's why their stories are very dramatic, and I wrote 2 plays about them because in one of the things I'm trying to do in my dramatic writing, I'm a kind of chronicler of the Shaivite lineage in Karnataka, starting from 12th century and then this Madeshwara, Monteswami and so on. And other plays, though it's about other themes, are kinds of extensions of the same engagements which you find in my poetry also.
Do you find your dramas to be a kind of extension of your poetry, or what would you foreground if you're asked who you are, a playwright first or a poet, or
I am both.
Yeah.
Because after all, Bharata said Drishya Kavya, Shravya Kavya. And then Aristotle also believed that tragedy is a kind of poetry. It's only modern Western criticism which divided poetry and drama into genres, and Kalidasa is also a poet. Kavi Kulaguru, Kali Bhaso Hasa, Kavi Kulaguru, Kalidasa, it was a Sanskrit saying. So in our tradition, playwrights are also considered poets. Even prose writers, Bana is also considered a poet.
Yes.
So it's not the difference between
And we have the Natakantam Kavitvam kind of
verse
thing.
and prose. Poetry can be written both in verse and in prose. For example, Sushruta Samhita is written in verse, but it's not kavya. Many Shastric texts are written in verse, they're not kavya. A lot of things are written in prose. Dandi's works, for example, they're poetry.
Yeah, I think, do we have some time for one or two questions? We can take one or two questions from the audience about, could be related to his work or maybe around Kannada literature. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Shivaprakash and Professor Satchidanandan, for this enriching conversation. Like in Uttara Bharata, where saying that you realize Krishna as expediting the destruction of the clan. Now, what is the larger set of themes or ways of life implicated here? And what is the message for this in today's context? Maybe one thing is that when a thing has become non-sustainable, it has lived its time, it needs to give away to another modality of being and community.
When I write a play or a poem, I am not concerned with some abstract ideas, which can be analyzed like this. So one of the recurrent dialogues in this play is that we don't know the cause, and cause reveals itself bit by bit through consequences. So everybody is trying to figure out the meaning of what's going on. Even Krishna. It could be because of Gandhari's curse, it could be because of something else. And in Oriya, Bhagavata, Krishna is killed by this Jara, and Jara was Vali in his previous life. So when Rama, in his avatar as Rama, Krishna had killed Vali unjustifiably, and he has to pay for it. So all these things are action and reaction thing is what I'm trying to explore. But I don't want to sum up the philosophy of it, because the learned people like you should read it and then summarize the philosophy of it.
Another question? Is there another question?
Shiva, you faced a very turbulent kind of issues you faced during the writing of Mahachaitra and the performance, and I don't know how many people it is aware of such things, but now you are trying to write plays, and if that kind of a turbulent situation you have to face now, if it is like that, how can we see, it's a political question. In Mahachaitra you faced a lot of problems, but nowadays you cannot live at all if you write that kind of things. What is the situation in Karnataka?
No, situations, people don't know what to do. Some people are just issuing paper statements, and a lot of people are, casting aspersions on me because I've never been a paper tiger. I've never been, even during the emergency, I never issued any paper statements. I express everything through my works. And when I wrote Mahachaitra, I was very raw and young and so on and so forth. I thought I could change the world the next year or the next month. But now I've grown wiser. So all passion spent, calm of mind. Now I think a good model for us is not the confrontationist kind of politics in writing. It's like the way great Russian writers like Tajnev and Pushkin and others, they express their distress and disgust with the Tsarist regime without saying it openly. And I think we're in such a situation because we have to survive, and not all of us need to become martyrs. And what did Kalburgi get by becoming the martyr? So, because things will change, and when there was emergency we thought it would never change, but it did change. So, this too shall pass. There's a Sufi story when a king went to his Sufi master and said, "Give me something which makes me a little, calm when I am very exuberant and a little full of hope when I am in distress." He said, "Okay." He gave me a ring, and the ring said, he said, "Whenever you are too happy or too sad, look at it. This too shall pass." So today, all my writings are imbued with this awareness that this too shall pass.
Sir, I thank you, both of you, for the very enlightening, very insightful discussion. Sir, my question to you, Shivaprakash sir, this is slightly political, you can consider. Of course, literature and politics can't be disengaged. Now, emergency you faced, we have faced. I was a young boy of 19 years at that time. Now I'm 69. Now, that time it was a declared emergency. Now there is undeclared emergency. So, how do we face this, or how to confront, or how to overcome, how to go about your comments? I'm from Bangalore.
Past solutions don't work for the present. If the problem had a solution, if you could apply the past solution to the present, it wouldn't be a problem. We don't know the solution. We are trying to find out how we can survive and say what we need to say in a way that doesn't jeopardize our very existence.
Thank you. On that note, we will conclude this short session.
I think what we have today is something which can't be described as traditional capitalism, but something else is being born. You can give it any name, but we experience it to survive that.